They called him a drunkard. They called him a glutton. They said he surrounded himself with the worst people society had to offer: tax collectors, prostitutes, criminals, outcasts. And the strange part is, this isn't an accusation invented by skeptics or critics of Christianity centuries later. It comes straight from the pages of the Bible itself, spoken about Jesus Christ, the man millions of people around the world worship as the Son of God. So how did the most righteous man to ever walk the earth end up with a reputation like that? And why did he never deny it? If you have ever pictured Jesus as a quiet, solemn figure who kept his distance from anything remotely scandalous, what you are about to hear may completely change the way you see him. Because buried inside the Gospels is a passage that religious leaders of his own time used against him, an accusation so serious that under Jewish law, it could have gotten him stoned to death. And instead of running from it, Jesus embraced it, almost as if he wanted people to notice. Let's go back to where this all begins. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, Jesus is speaking to a crowd about John the Baptist, his cousin and forerunner. John lived in the wilderness. He wore rough clothing, ate locusts and wild honey, and refused wine altogether. He was the picture of religious austerity, the kind of holy man people expected. And yet, according to Jesus, the religious leaders rejected John too. They said he had a demon. Then Jesus makes a startling comparison. He says that he himself came eating and drinking, living among people in a completely different way than John did, and that the same critics turned around and called him a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Stop and sit with that for a moment. This is not an enemy of Christianity writing centuries later trying to tear down the faith. This is Jesus quoting his own critics in front of a crowd, and he does not correct them. He does not say, "That's a lie, I have never touched wine in my life." He does not defend his reputation. He simply states what people were saying, almost as a badge of honor, before moving on to a deeper point about wisdom being proven right by her children. So why does this matter so much? To understand that, we need to understand what these accusations actually meant in first-century Jewish culture, because they carried far more weight than they might sound like to modern ears. In the ancient world, and especially within Jewish law, there was a very specific legal category for a rebellious son. It comes from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21. If a son was stubborn and rebellious, one who would not obey his father or mother, the parents could bring him before the elders of the city, and the son would be formally accused using two specific words: glutton and drunkard. If found guilty, the punishment prescribed under that law was death by stoning. This was not a soft insult. It was the language of a capital charge. When the Pharisees called Jesus a glutton and a drunkard, they were not simply mocking his table manners. They were invoking the legal language used to condemn a rebellious son to death. Think about what that means. The religious establishment of Jesus' day was not just gossiping about his social habits. They were building a case. They were framing him publicly, using the exact terminology that Jewish law reserved for someone deserving capital punishment. And Jesus knew it. He understood exactly what those words implied, and he repeated them anyway, in front of a crowd, without flinching. Now here is where the story becomes even more uncomfortable for anyone who wants a sanitized version of Jesus. The accusation was not entirely baseless in the sense that Jesus really did eat and drink among people who scandalized the religious elite. The Gospels are full of these scenes. He eats at the house of Matthew, a tax collector, surrounded by other tax collectors and, as the text says, sinners. The Pharisees ask his disciples why their teacher eats with such people. His answer is one of the most quoted lines in the New Testament. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. He attends a wedding in Cana and turns water into wine. Not a small amount, but roughly 120 gallons, after the guests had already been drinking for some time, according to the customs described in the text. He accepts dinner invitations from Pharisees themselves, and even in those settings, he allows a woman with a scandalous reputation to wash his feet with her tears and dry them with her hair, an act so intimate and socially inappropriate that his host is horrified. Jesus does not send her away. He defends her in front of everyone. Over and over again, the pattern repeats. Jesus deliberately places himself in situations that respectable religious society considered improper, scandalous, even sinful by association. And he does this not by accident, but seemingly by design. So why would the Son of God intentionally cultivate a reputation this controversial? Why not simply live a life beyond reproach, one that gave his enemies no ammunition at all? This is where the deeper truth hidden in this accusation starts to surface, and it is far more radical than most people realize. Jesus was not careless about his reputation. He was making a statement, one that struck directly at the heart of how the religious establishment of his time understood holiness itself. The Pharisees believed that righteousness required separation. The very word Pharisee is thought to derive from a root meaning separated ones. Holiness in their system meant staying away from anything or anyone considered unclean, sinful, or compromised. You did not eat with sinners. You did not associate with tax collectors who were seen as traitors collaborating with Rome. You did not let a woman with a reputation touch you in public. Contamination, in their worldview, spread outward, from the unclean person to the clean one. Jesus flips that entire framework upside down. In his actions, he demonstrates a completely different theology, one where holiness does not shrink from contact with sin, but moves toward it, and where purity does not become contaminated by proximity to the broken. Instead, something else happens. The presence of Jesus transforms the very people he associates with. Matthew, the tax collector, becomes a gospel writer. The sinful woman becomes an example of extravagant faith and love. Zacchaeus, another notorious tax collector, gives away half his wealth after one encounter with Jesus at his own dinner table. In other words, the accusation that Jesus was a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of sinners, was not a scandal that undermined his mission. It was the mission. The very thing his enemies used to condemn him under the language of Jewish law was, according to the gospel writers, the clearest evidence of who he truly was. He was not slumming it with sinners out of moral laziness. He was demonstrating, in the most provocative and public way possible, that God's love was not reserved for the ceremonially clean and socially respectable. It reached into the places religious society considered off-limits. There is another layer to this that even many long-time believers rarely stop to consider. The rebellious son-in-law in Deuteronomy required that both father and mother bring the accusation together, and it required them to testify that their son would not listen to their voice. When the religious leaders labeled Jesus a glutton and a drunkard, Some scholars argue they were implicitly casting him as disobedient to God the Father, framing his entire ministry as rebellion against the very authority he claimed to represent. If that charge had stuck in the court of public opinion, it would have completely undermined his claim to be the Son of God, obedient in all things to the Father's will. And yet Jesus never seems threatened by it. If anything, his response in Luke 7 suggests something almost defiant. He essentially says, "You rejected John for being too austere, and now you reject me for the opposite reason. No matter what form righteousness takes, you find a way to condemn it." The real issue was never actually about wine or dinner guests. The real issue was that both John and Jesus exposed the emptiness of a religious system built on external appearances rather than internal transformation, and the guardians of that system could not tolerate the exposure. This raises a question that should genuinely unsettle a lot of modern religious assumptions. If the religious leaders with the deepest knowledge of Scripture, the ones who had memorized the Torah and studied the law their entire lives, could completely misjudge Jesus and label him a criminal deserving of death, what does that say about how easily religious certainty can be weaponized against the very thing it claims to protect? What does it say about how comfortable religious systems can become with excluding people rather than reaching them? And there is a harder question underneath that one, a question many churches today still have not fully answered. If Jesus deliberately chose to be seen at the tables of tax collectors, the socially rejected, and people with damaged reputations, to the point where his own peers accused him of a capital crime for it, why do so many modern expressions of Christianity still treat proximity to sinners as something to avoid rather than something to embrace? Somewhere between the Gospels and today, did the message get flipped back to exactly the kind of separation Jesus was condemning in the first place? There is no tidy way to close this out. And honestly, that may be exactly the point. The Gospel writers did not sand down this accusation or hide it in a footnote. They put it directly into the mouth of Jesus in one of his own recorded teachings and let it stand without a rebuttal. That is not the kind of detail an ancient writer includes if they are trying to protect someone's image. It is the kind of detail you include if you believe it reveals something essential and true. So here is the question worth sitting with long after this video ends. If the religious authorities of Jesus' own day, people who knew the law inside and out, condemned him using language reserved for a capital crime and got it completely wrong, how confident should any of us be that we would have recognized him correctly if we had been standing in that crowd ourselves? And more importantly, if he showed up the same way today, choosing the same company, would the modern church welcome him, or would history repeat itself?